How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the last week. We are done with the semester. Today's last day of classes for everyone. Um, so, congratulations. Way to make it through. Yeah. Read your discussion posts. Good. A lot of good reflections there. I mean, hopefully, everyone can take something from this class and it sort of resonates with you on some level. A lot of people talked about the importance of interconnections. Silk Road, I mean, I really emphasize that. And I think that really shapes world history the most. How much we are connected in the past and the present as well. Um, cool. Yeah, like the last this week we sort of talked about again. Sort of started with a review, sort of 1,000 to 1,500. What's going on a global scale? And again, another good way to kind of remember back. I mean, 1,000 CE was maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. We started that discussion, but I mean, if you go around the world, maybe think about what's going on in these 500 years, because there's quite a bit. I mean, last week we just talked about sort of this dark age, if you will, or bright age, a revival of Western Europe. Before that, we were Americas, Oceania, Africa, kingdoms, empires emerging there. Um, Asia, Han is about 1,000, and then the Song dynasty of China. So a lot of things going on, and then obviously the Mongols and this sort of this large Eurasian kingdom empire they were able to build, and really that sort of facilitated a lot of these movements from east to west, um, both in people and products and ideas. The two that I kind of picked out there, Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, gave you some readings about there. Again, these are really good primary source is about what life was like, sort of 13th, 14th century. They were pseudo contemporaries a little bit. They were kind of a little bit off. I think Marco Polo was 20, 40 years before Ibn Battuta. But again, I mean, 500 years ago, that's still pretty close. And they both exemplify this ability of ease of transport between these different worlds, from Venice, from Marco Polo to China, Kublai Khan, from Morocco through the Dar al Islam all the way into China and then back up into Central Asia with Ibn Battuta. So they kind of talk about and show these things. Similar to Zhuangzong gave us an insight into China and India back in the day. Um, yeah, and then the other thing that transmits across trade routes often is disease. And the Black Plague started in China, presumably, because that society started collapsing first, and reports of that, and then spread via trade routes into Constantinople, later into Europe, and then really sort of seen as this cataclysmic, and again, it wasn't like it came and left. It was around for 5, 10 years, would go around and spark back up again. People didn't really know what was causing it. Some people got, immune to it, but you can still get it. And it was a pretty bad way to die. I mean, bulbing black lymph nodes. It's pretty gross. So it really kind of like changed things, both sort of economically. There was, at first things broke down, but then a lot of people moved. A lot of, particularly serfs, sort of moved. People who were in the rural areas moved to cities, particularly in Europe, sort of signifies the end of feudalism. Those aristocrats who were still around kind of consolidated their power, created larger, more sort of organized, structured, consolidated kingdoms. Kind of shifts out of this, the trade routes were still there enough to create economic worlds, which is where you get this sort of renaissance, new ideas. A lot of people were sort of challenging religion, what was going on here, why was this happening. Some of it got directed towards minorities, women, Jews in these areas where they sort of took the brunt of some of this religious uncertainty. But you also see sort of these reflections in art, literature. The Renaissance is very much part of that, sort of this celebration of revival of the human spirit there, sort of talked about. And then you also see this in the Chinese side. The Ming Dynasty is a sort of cultural revival of Chinese worlds. After the Yuan Mongol invasion, the Chinese came out, built the Forbidden City. They sent these treasure fleets into the Indian Ocean, Zhenghe, Zhenghe, and in various groups. So you sort of see all these connections. And that gives us right up to 1500. The last little part of that is as a way to reintegrate into these connections. The sort of overland routes were somewhat cut off by the emerging Ottoman Empire, who conquered Constantinople in 1453, which and then so the other people were saying with new technologies that were introduced, Latin sails and compasses. They were these people like the Portuguese and later the Spanish decided to do maritime routes to these trading to re-engage with the Silk Road. The idea was to get to India and the spices. The Portuguese were able to do that circa around Africa, Cape of Good Hope. And then their rivals, the Spanish, somebody approached them. This guy named Colombo, Christopher Columbus, approached the Spanish and said, "Hey, do you want to like undercut the Portuguese? I'll go west if you fund this venture, and I'll go to India that way." Ran into what he called the Indies, which is the Caribbean now, and then and that's the cusp of 1500. That's where we'll end with sort of this age of expansion that will reconnect old worlds and new worlds and new trading networks, political organizations, all that kind of stuff. That's where we'll end. So that's kind of the summary of that, and then great, and then the final May 13th. 9 a.m. to 11:55 p.m. anytime within there. You have 2 hours to complete the exam. Do look over the first 3 sections are very similar. Geography, fill in the blank, matching, and then 5 W's. Do note the 5 W's. This time you got to use 3 terms. Sorry, I just updated that. I had revised it, but I forgot to load it on the Lamaku. So that's that. Yeah, and then the last section you haven't really seen yet, but it's a little longer essay, maybe like 2-3 paragraphs, where it'll ask kind of a broader world historical question. There'll be 3 questions. You choose one of them. Each question will have 5 terms. You need to kind of like connect these 5 terms together in your answer. Should be relatively straightforward, I think. But within your answer, try to integrate these terms to find them, and they're all related to the topic that's given there. My only caveat is, make sure these are your own words. This is your one way to show me what you've learned over the course of the semester. I have a lot of finals to grade. If I get a bunch of AI stuff or things that we haven't covered in the class, I'm just going to move on, just give you a 0 and move on. I just have a lot going on. If it's your words and your ideas, awesome. I want to hear them. If not, I don't. So, so show me, take this opportunity to show me how you can talk about these connections in world history. What have you accomplished in the last 16 weeks? If you show me that, communicate that, you'll be just fine. So I think that's it. Have a good summer.